McDonald, Alyssa Devon, Michael Dixon,
Here.
Mark Bymaster, Kathleen Weigel,
Here.
Leandre Camel.
Here.
Joyce Edison, Executive Assistant.
Good morning, Michael Dixon, Audit Committee.
Master Audit Committee.
Heather Frederick, Chief Financial Officer.
Nancy Samuels, Accounting Director.
Brett Friedman, Partner, RSM.
Chantel Knowles, Manager, RSM.
Okay, over to the left, I'll have you all introduce yourself, please.
Mike Callahan, IT.
Okay. And then over here, let's start with introductions with you.
Good morning, Robin Brown.
Thank you, Robin. Okay, great. Again, thank you all for being here. We'll first take a look at the agenda, and after you've had a chance to look at it, I'll accept a motion to approve the agenda.
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda.
There's a motion. Is there a second?
Leandre, second.
All in favor? All opposed? Passed unanimously. All right, next, take a minute and review the minutes of the February 18th meeting, and after we've had a chance to review those, again, I'll accept a motion to approve.
I have a comment about the minutes on item 4. We talked about it at our last meeting, and it's referenced, and I understand we're going to get a presentation from the IT people this morning, so this may be academic, but the last sentence of the last bullet of item 4 talked about follow-up to the process that we were talking about at the meeting concerning safety and the buses themselves and the follow-up on the pre and post rides. And we had commented, and again, this may be academic, so the point was there was a lot of paper moving around, and we saw a lot of deficiencies in the reporting, so maybe that'll be addressed today. Is that correct?
IT is here to discuss the background screening, but they may also be able to discuss the improvements that they are putting forward on the bus and the issues on the post inspections. I will
Okay.
say that the committee had requested that the auditors go back out to do another
Yes.
inspection that has been scheduled. Of course, it's unannounced, so we haven't set those dates out, but it will be happening. And IT may be able to speak to that today as
Okay,
to what they're
fine.
moving
That's-
forward.
I can speak to it whenever, so it could be now
Okay,
or
that's fine. That's fine, thank you. I didn't know we were going to have the full presentation from the IT people today. Another comment I have was another follow-up item. I'd like to know the status of, for the record, 36, it's number 35.56. I'll just give you the page, I guess, page, section, page, and sentence number. It's a follow-up with the chief of police, where we are on that.
Yes, that, I spoke to Chief McCutcheon on that, and he requested if he could have another month. He's just new into the position, and there's been a couple other issues, as well as the background screening follow-up that he's going to present. He will be setting that up, and we will be looking at doing a closed session if there's a need to do that out of the sunshine. We'll run that through Blair Littlejohn in the General Counsel's office, but they've agreed to do that.
Thank you. And last item, I'm sorry to move this along, I'm sorry. 5608. We will have to go back and look at our annual reports and add this up. Was that done? 5608?
Yes, I have that for you. You're talking about the annual projects.
Right.
We had 120 million competitive solicitations, and we picked 6. 21 this year. Last year, there were 6 for 109 million. So we went up on that. You also asked the dollar amount of every project. The work plan's not a cumulative project total. The project types are consistent with major renovation projects, non-construction projects, or special requests for contract review. The Verde was categorized as a major renovation project exceeding 36 million.
Right, okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Okay, are there any other questions? If not, I'll accept the motion to approve last month's meeting agenda. or
Weigel,
minutes.
so move.
Or a second?
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Passed unanimously. Public comments. Okay, hearing none, we'll go on to item 4, audit report, special review of missing money at JFK Middle School.
I believe we have Susie Kay, Supervisor of Audits, to present that.
Good morning. I don't know if this is on. Is this, Carrie, do you know how to turn this on?
Yeah, let's see.
Good morning.
Morning.
Am I on, Mark? Okay.
Good job on the minutes. Very good.
Joyce, if you can put up the slides for this. This was a special review that we performed at John F. Kennedy Middle School that was based from a request from the Accounting Services Department. You can go to the next slide. The objectives of this was to determine whether all the collections were properly processed and deposited in the school bank account of the money collections at that school, and if all the monies in the drop safe were properly accounted for, and to the extent of compliance with district procedures and safeguarding money after collection. As I stated, this was a review that was performed in response to a request from the Accounting Services Department. We looked at all money collections for the current school year, starting July 1st up through December 22nd, when we came into that school. And included in this review was 2 unannounced cash counts, which we'll talk about a little later. Next slide. To give you some background, County Services Department came to us with a couple concerns. They felt as if the school treasurer was not timely processing the cash collections for deposit into the bank. State rules require that any collection from the point that it's collected by a staff member till it gets to the bank is 5 days. We consider it in the bank once it's in the drop safe and once it's been processed into school cash. There was also an excessive number of collections listed on the drop safe log that were notated as returned to safe for error, but no additional explanations. There were no initials by the sponsors to indicate that they had received money back from the treasurer or that they had made any corrections on the monies collected reports. And the return collections, Accounting Services was not able to trace some of those return collections to subsequent entries on the drop safe log. Also, we noticed that the school treasurer was not timely reporting to Accounting Services when the courier pickup was missed. We do know that the courier was having scheduling problems, lack of drivers, and they were having issues, but there was a requirement they were supposed to notify Accounting Services if they didn't get a pickup. Next slide. So after our review, the conclusions we came up with was we determined that there was $904 from that time period that could not be accounted for. was a cash collection. So the first unannounced site visit we did was on December 20th. And what we do at an unannounced site visit, which we just did 8 of them yesterday at different schools, we walk in and we take and we open the drop safe, and we compare contents in the drop safe to the drop safe log and all the deposit records that are available. And we did, in addition to this particular school, to that drop safe log inspection, we did a full inspection from July 1st up through December 20th. So after, we spoke to a lot of the sponsors, and we had them bring us their teacher copy of their receipts so that we could trace some of this money to the bank. And when it was all done, there was this one entry on the drop safe log that said $704. And it said return to safe for error, but it didn't appear as if anyone had signed it out of the safe. And then when you actually inspected it, it looked as if it was $904 that had been overwritten for $704. When we spoke to the sponsor, she presented us with her copy of the MCR, which was originally $904. The change was made by the sponsor at the treasurer's instruction, according to the sponsor. And of course, none of the money was ever recounted that we determined after our discussions. We went back 2 days later, on December 22nd, did another unannounced site visit because we wanted to verify for sure that we had not missed anything. And again, that money could not be located, it was not in the drop safe, and it was not deposited into the bank. Next slide. So our final conclusions were, in addition to having this $904 unaccounted for, we also had these non-compliances with district procedures. At our first safe inspection, we noticed that there was one collection for $240 that had been dropped in the safe, but the sponsor never put it on the drop safe log. And then we also noted that over the course of from July 1st to December 20th, there was 14 different entries, which accounted for 12% of the entries on the log that were returned to safe for error, with no additional explanations. And also, of course, as we spoke, the sponsors are not acknowledging that they're being given back the collections as they should be. So the next slide on our recommendation was to ensure that to ensure proper fiscal accountability, we're recommending that the district, the school comply with procedures and the staff as required. We did do a referral to school police on December 21st because of the missing money. And on January 25th, school police came back and notified the office that the investigation of monies was completed and that the case is inactive at this time. And on January 6th, our investigation unit from our office has received this case and they're doing further review.
Okay, thank you, Susie. Questions of the committee members?
Mr. Chair, I have a question.
I have a question. What does it mean that on the 25th of January, that comment? What's that mean if, I don't understand the timing here. If the thing is still under investigation, but it's inactive.
It's no longer under investigation by school police.
They just said, give it back?
They determined, correct.
Okay. Okay, that's what that means.
School police could not determine
Okay.
who took the money.
Oh, that's fine. Oh, that's what that means.
Yeah,
Right.
so we're looking at it to see if we can determine where the issue
Fine.
resolved.
Okay. Do we still use manual paper for this blogs and stuff?
Yes, sir.
That's still paper too, right? Where we have them numbered, and we talked about this a couple years ago, and
Yes, sir.
blah, 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 blah. So the IT people are here, they can hear this, right? This is great.
Okay, are there any further questions or comments?
Mr. Talley?
Yes. Mr. Chairman?
He asked the question, one of the questions I had. I just wanted to make sure when you go to the schools, you're still checking for pages, so we're still using numbered pages and bound books for the registers, correct?
Yes, sir.
And are we checking to make sure that the school is retaining the old ones as they fill one up? They're
Ye-
keeping them on site somewhere so that you can see those when you go to the school?
Yes. That's all part of our verification.
And then I just wanted to add, that that's on the audit side, the internal audit side, but within the accounting department, that's something that we look at every single month, and those records are actually scanned and emailed to our department to review so that we can do that on a more timely basis, since the audit is only done annually.
Okay.
And so that's why the issue was identified so early.
Correct.
And then why we referred it to the Inspector General's department.
All right, great, thank you very much.
Any additional comments or questions? If not, I'll entertain a motion to approve the report.
I'll make a motion to approve the report.
Is there a second?
Leandre, second.
All in favor? All
Aye.
opposed? Passed unanimously. And again, Susie, thank you. You did a nice job.
Thank
We
you, sir.
appreciate it. Okay, we'll move on to item 5, fiscal year 2021 annual internal funds report audit. Terry?
And again, Susie Kay is up to bat.
You don't get rid of me that fast. This is the annual internal funds audit for all of the 174 schools in the district that we compile. And this is where I get to come up and celebrate my team that did an amazing job of getting all of the schools completed in a timely fashion. We were finished with the field work in February in order to get the management letter off to Heather and her team. And they got it back to us in record time, and we are sitting here in the month of March presenting this report. So we are very excited.
Wow.
Starting with so for those that are unfamiliar with this process, this is an annual audit that is required under state rules, and that if you go to the next, oh, lost my slide up there. There we go. So this is an annual audit required by state rules that we do an internal funds audit of each school each year, and that we present a signed report to the school board that also notes any failures to comply with Florida statutes, rules, or school board policies. And the report is also required to make comments on any financial management or noncompliances. Next slide. So some background. What are internal funds? These are the monies that are collected and are spent within a school for school activities. So things such as field trips, athletics, your fundraising, after-school programs, and community school fees. Monies that are used for financing the activities that are not otherwise funded through the general budget. Every school has a single bank account with a checkbook, and all of the monies for these activities go through that single account. And this is what we are looking at the transactions and compliances of. Next. So in fiscal year 2021, we had 174 schools. We had a total revenue and disbursements last year of $26.6 million revenue, $27.7 million in revenue. And it kind of stands out that we were down $40 million from the prior year. Because of COVID and the way things changed, there was a dramatic decrease this past year in revenues and expenditures. Probably some of the larger decreases occurred in the after-school programming fee collections. They were the one single, there was like almost a $9 million decrease in revenues from one year to the next. Field trip collections, because we were not doing field trips, or minimal. Fundraising went way down, as well as any other, like even facility leasing, there was a lot of money. So that's where a lot of the decrease occurred. Surprisingly, fund balances remained relatively level. They only were down $1.1 million by the end of last year. Go to the next slide. I always put this up every year. This is just an FYI. It's just kind of this is what the average school balances are by region and area, just to give you a flavor of how the balances at in the different areas and the different levels. This is very telling in terms of revenue collections over the past years. This is since 2004 when the office took over the function of auditing internal funds. And one of the things I always like to point out is despite all of the ups and the downs there, the staff size in this office has remained pretty much consistent over that time period. And then for my my favorite guy up there with his thumbs up. So, the overall conclusions and findings obviously went way down this year, which was great, and the number of schools with no material findings went way up. A school not receiving a report of no findings doesn't mean that they're absolutely pristine, clean, perfect. But what it could mean is that what findings were there were minor, immaterial, and not worth reporting at this point in a report. But we do discuss every situation that we do see with the principal and the treasurers while we're at those schools. So moving on, these are the 55 schools that had no reportable findings during fiscal year 21. And there were 6 schools that have had 4 years in a row of no findings, 2 with 3 years, and 11 that have gone 2 years in a row. And the remaining schools may be schools that it's their first time or they skipped a couple years in between. So I think that's very commendable. And what it shows is that these are the schools that have got they have a school community that has embraced following the rules, and they probably have principals that are very strong in terms of creating that tone at the top, as they like to say, of this is the right way to do it, and people are following their lead. So the overall conclusions and findings, we had a total of 10 conclusions in 4 different categories. First one was in disbursements. When looking at the authorization of a disbursement, on the next slide, we had documentation, I'm sorry, I'm ahead of myself on my own slides. So during the years we talked, there was about 27 million in disbursements, 8 million through the P card at the schools. We look at documentation for completeness to make sure that it does give enough detail to explain what the purchase and purpose of that purchase was. So at 6 schools, we had no supporting documentation on a transaction that we looked at, or insufficient documentation at 33 schools. I want you to understand that when we report this, we're reporting it as we look at samples of transactions at every school, but we report this in terms of which schools did we see this occurrence. This is not specific number of transactions. This is the number of schools where we saw the occurrence. On the next slide, we also look to see if transactions have been authorized properly. So for instance, any purchase of $1,000 or more needs a pre-signed purchase order by the principal. And the purpose of that is so that the principal knows, A, there's a very large purchase about to occur, and to verify that the funding is in place before it happens and before you commit to that purchase. So at 48 schools, we still encountered situations in where purchases were made, orders were made, before the purchase order was ever put in front of the principal. We also came across at 8 schools contracts being signed by staff members other than principals. A lot of times, the most common time you see that is usually with a yearbook contract where the sponsor will sign in lieu of the principal. But the principal still is the sole person that can commit the school. On the next slide, we've also encountered at 8 schools where vendors perform services on campus and the consultant agreement had not been obtained and signed by the consultant and the principal at that school. Part of it is to make sure that the background screening requirements have been verified before the person comes on and has contact with students. Moving on to revenue collections, we look to see if the monies are being deposited within the 5-day rule. The staff members themselves actually have a 1-day requirement that the district requires that any staff that collects money has it in drop safe log properly recorded by the end of that working day. So we look at that, and we also look to see that the collection has been processed for deposit within 5 working days. And at 12 schools, we found, which is coming down, which is good, We did find situations where staff have held money or the treasurer was not processing the money in a timely manner. On the next slide, we also look at pre-numbered documents, and that includes the drop safe log, as Mr. Barbieri asked. It includes school checks, classroom receipt books, any financial document that's pre-numbered used for collecting or recording money. So the district has created a document custodian position that is assigned by the principal, and part of their duties is to maintain the inventories and control of these pre-numbered documents. So we're checking those procedures to see if they're occurring. The 31 schools where there was no inventory performed, the bulk of that was usually they do the drop safe log and they forget about school checks or the classroom receipts. So, or even in a high school, you have your pre-numbered tickets for game sales and things like that. So those are the items that we're still coming across at those schools. Then we also looked at we look at the fundraising activities, and we look at this for compliance with board policy and district procedures. And the non-compliances are predominantly in these 4 categories. So on the next slide, the insufficient or lack of documentation, this has to do with products that are for resale, t-shirts, yearbooks. They may not have a sales item inventory report, is either missing or they're not using it completely at 16 schools. And that's the document that the district has put in place in order to help the school reconcile what money they should expect to be receiving for the fundraising against the money that's actually turned in. And then on the next slide, we also look at, again, authorization. Any fundraiser has to be pre-authorized by the principal before it starts, and that includes whether they start purchasing or selling. And at 12 schools, we found situations where the fundraising application was missing. We also had 2 schools where the activity got started before the principal actually authorized it. And then the sales item, at the end of a sale, the sales item inventory report is then presented back to the school principal for sign-off, and that allows the principal to see if there was any items that, excessive items that were used as giveaways or lost, what the reason behind those were, what inventories left on stock. In the next slide, the district has an annual requirement for online training, and any activity sponsor that is going to hold a fundraiser is required to take this e-learning fundraising prior to starting a fundraiser every year. It helps make sure that they're up to date on any changes in the procedures that have occurred. At 12 schools, we've reported that the sponsors did not complete the training. Now, I need you to understand that when we report this, it's because there was something else in that fundraiser that also was not done properly, and in addition to that, that sponsor did not take the training. If the school, there's many situations where the sponsor gets everything perfectly right, but they don't do the training, and those are ones that we do not report. At the on the last section we look at, we also look to try to verify whether the revenue that's reported is accurate and agrees with the estimates from the sales item inventory report. And at 9 schools, we came across what appeared to be revenue shortages. A lot of times it has to do with the inventory not being properly recorded at the beginning or the end. The other situation we'll encounter occasionally is where revenue is being recorded into the primary account for the activity instead of a separate, what we call a decimalized account. And the money's become commingled with other activities, which makes it difficult to determine if everything was collected. A new area that we added to this year's report is a recommendation for clarification on online fundraisers. We encountered a lot of online fundraisers because of COVID. People have switched to this model more often, and this is not crowdfunding. These are your holiday shops, yearbooks, where the vendor is handling the sale, but there's confusion among staff we came across. They weren't sure as to what was required for documentation of that type of a fundraiser, and without, and there was nothing going on to assure that the school was receiving any agreed-upon portion of revenues from the vendor. So that's just something that we've asked the district to look at in terms of clarifying for staff, and I think they're going to add some information to their training next year. We also looked at facilities leasing, which we discussed earlier was a whole lot less use because of COVID. We found that the non-compliances, though, in terms of the missing signatures and the lack of prepayment has gone way down. So there was much improvement in this area. After-school programming, we still look to see if students are being released to individuals that are listed on the registration forms. And a lot of times if the signatures are illegible, we just can't make that determination. So that's something that, they have signature cards, or they're supposed to have a signature card in place. Those are things that are still being worked on. We also encounter incomplete registration forms. That form has a lot of information that's required for the director to be able to run the program efficiently and safely for the children. There's also, we came across discrepancies between attendance sheets and the parent sign-out sheets, and where the attendance sheet shows the students there, but the parent never signed the student out, or vice versa. And when you start looking at the subsidy audits, they get very particular about those situations. And I think this year was a very good audit from my perspective, and I will entertain any questions if you have any.
I'd just like to make a comment, and that is, it looks like overall that the violations have come down. Where there's always still need for improvement, I think we're heading in the right direction. So with that, I'll entertain any comments or questions of the committee members.
I have a couple questions,
Michael?
please. On your statement of combined changes in fund balance, there's an item number 6, trust, with $8 million in it. I know what a trust is, but could you explain to me how the school district looks at this, what it is?
Nancy, do you want to explain the trust funds?
Those are items, those are donations that are received that are for a restricted purpose.
So we get a whole fund balance? We get a whole trust to manage?
Well, it's not considered, it's not a trust, it's just what it's labeled.
It's titled, yeah.
Yeah, within the DOE Red Book, but it's more like if you're considering a grant, it's donations received that need to be spent in a specific way.
Okay, so there was distributions from trust of $8 million at the beginning of the fiscal year, right? That we got funds for. And we were holding those funds in an account, I guess, one account? One account?
No.
No, because it's going to be
Each
separated.
distribution has one account? I'm just trying to understand what this means.
There's also the after-school fees are in the trust category. So they collect and then they transfer them to the district. So that would be some of that disbursement.
Right, because anything that would be reimbursed back to the district. But yeah, each of the donations are tracked separately, so we can ensure that whatever hasn't been spent stays set aside and is not going to be utilized for a purpose that is not allowed within whatever the donation or terms of those funds.
Okay, and how many are there? By example, 100, 200?
No, more than that, because a
1,000?
lot of them are very small dollar amounts.
Okay, a lot of them.
And that's why they're not within the district. So if there's any donations received over $10,000, those would flow through the district. These are ones that are going to be less than $10,000, and we allow them to stay at the school site.
Kathy, did you have any question or comment?
was that they did an excellent job. I mean, when you figure out that they've added no extra personnel for years, and to see all of the schools get done with this kind of fashion, with the professionalism that they do, and most of the schools come out better for it. So as a former principal, when we sit and listen to the audit findings, it's how do you make things better? So I can't thank the auditors for what they've done, because I know it's a huge job, but I can say from a principal perspective that I know it's greatly appreciated. So thank you.
Good. Other questions or comments?
A comment. The one thing I'd like to see with these reports is that these reports are, it's pretty much emphasizes on occurrence as improving or as improving from year to year, whereas certain areas should probably be looked at a little bit differently, like disbursements, to where if your non-compliance occurrences are going down, doesn't necessarily mean that there's improvements. So say you had low dollar amounts that are going down, but you have high dollar amounts that are going up, but there's going to be a smaller amount of high dollar. Doesn't necessarily mean that that's the criteria that bases it on improvement. So I'd like to see, like with disbursements, to kind of see like the value, like how many there non-compliance of over 10,000, how many under 1,000, just to see where. Because the criteria would be more about the value, not how many times it's happening.
Okay.
Well, you want to weight them. You
Yeah.
want to weight the occurrence, not
Yeah.
just the number of occurrences. I agree. That's a good suggestion.
We could do that. We could set a threshold and do a categories within different thresholds and report that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mark, good suggestion. Other comments or questions? Mr. Chairman?
I don't know if it's you, Mr. Talley, or the IG's office, but I'd like you to take a look at the Construction Oversight Review Committee reports that are given to the board. They list comments and concerns raised by court members. I'd like the board to know that there's comments and concerns from the audit committee members. We don't get to see that. I get to see it, my colleagues don't. And the other thing, sorry about that. The other thing is, could you make sure that those PowerPoints are attached to the board agenda for the board members to see those, because we don't get those either. I get to see them, but other board members don't. So if you could take a look at the Quirk report and make sure the comments that are raised by the audit committee members are there for the board members to see, especially when there's concerns about follow-up and things like that. The board needs to know that those questions were asked and what the response was from audit or the IG's office.
Well taken.
Definitely could do that.
Thank you. Okay.
Yeah, there's one last thing, and then you can move on, Mr. Talley. On this chart, this is a great chart, this 5-year chart. Great job. Great job. Could you go back to your comment about the revenues and disbursements decrease in the fiscal year we're looking at versus the prior year? And how much, what was that 20, was it 100% different, or was it, what was the number?
The,
You said $20 million less or something in gross receipts or something? I forget the number.
we went down, the revenues, hold on.
Yeah.
I believe it was around a $40 million
Yeah, it was-
of reduction.
It was.
So, and we know that, we do have to admit, and we even had it in our district response, the findings were down because the amount of collections and the amount of activity was down. We do want to not have any findings any year, but we do know that that's highly unlikely. There's a significant amount of turnover at the treasurer level, and Ms. Samuel's team works very hard on the training and professional development. So we were happy to see there are improvements, but we did want to caution the committee that we do expect to see those increase slightly next year when we have the increase in activity.
Yeah, that's what I was focusing on, because the numbers are good from the 20 to 21. They're great. They're fine, but if you double that revenue, or double the revenue, I'm not quite sure how good these numbers really are. But I'm not suggesting they're not good. I'm just saying we should pay attention to this in the next fiscal year for this internal fund audit. That's all.
Oh, I will say that in our, doing our unannounced cash counts at the schools, we're still finding very low cash collections this year. So we may not see a whole lot of increase next year yet either.
Okay. Well, it's a theory, so it's not, I'm only commenting. And I have one last question. All these findings, you're talking about giving it to the board. What about the schools themselves? Do they get these reports?
Oh, yes, they get an exit conference from, before we ever leave campus, we have a full discussion with the principal. They get a report. There's, I think it's attached to the agenda now, there's the 500-page version. And you'll see every 174 schools with the principal's comment back is attached.
Thank you. Thank you.
Additional questions or comments?
Yes, Mr. Chair, Leandre
Yes,
here.
Leandre.
We're expecting to see a difference with this because we are pushing to move cashless, correct? So therefore, the barometer using this improvement, which is great, but using these reports as a barometer over the next 2 years, we don't want to use this as a barometer, is basically what I'm saying, because we are looking for changes to come over the next 2 years as we move to a cashless district. And so it's a good report. I enjoy the report in the chairs that I sit in. It's just using it as a foundation for record keeping. It's just we don't want to do that or mislead in doing so.
Most definitely. We will continue looking at the process. Just because of a good finding or a downcrease or trend isn't going to change our attention to the issues. And we will adjust to the online cash, and we are going to continue to monitor regardless. There's nobody gets a pass because they've had 3 years of no findings or anything like that.
Gotcha. And the other comment is, would this have been a different outcome? Absences, COVID, being on-site, could that play a factor in some of the findings here and the timeliness of drops and of the occurrences?
There's always that we do take into account if someone's absent, like a treasurer, we look to see if they were out. If they were out, they obviously couldn't process, so no, we don't, we're not going to hit somebody up for not processing a deposit if they were out sick. So those are taken into account.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, additional comments or questions? Susie, again, great job. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, I'll accept the motion to approve
Make a
the
motion to
report.
approve this.
Is there a second?
Leandre,
Second
second.
it.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Passed unanimously. Okay, we'll go on to item 6, compliance contract review. This is strictly an FYI, management advisory, and Terry, I'll have you discuss, I think you discussed the buddy benches.
We also have Aida Smith, who actually did the buddy bench review. And this is Aida, would you like to speak to it, or do you want me to? Okay. Essentially, the buddy bench came to our attention through the district, who reported it to us, that there was concerns regarding these benches that were being installed in the schools without a contract. Some of the concerns that we developed from this was that the vendor was installing these benches, facility operations was not consulted, risk management wasn't consulted, fire marshal wasn't consulted, and some of these benches, we don't know if they're ADA compliant, where they're being installed, and it looks like it was a district-wide issue where the principals assumed that this was a approved program. And we found out that it was an approved program. We've now given the information to the district. They're going to take a look at it. We're also going to make sure that all of those benches that are installed are not a hazard. I understand one of the benches was installed indoors in a hallway, so the fire marshal may have some problems with that. We also have concerns that the buddy benches they're sponsored by different individuals, and whenever we have advertisement, we want to make sure that the sponsor is in accordance with the district's vision and outlook. We don't want some untoward company that maybe is, illicit, having a sponsorship, especially at an elementary school. Or how are we going to handle this if for some reason somebody who sponsors it turns up to be a nefarious individual? What do we do with that bench after it's been installed? So the district is looking at that. We're going to make sure that those are installed safely and appropriately and they're ADA compliant.
How much do these benches cost?
I believe it was, what, $1,500?
The cost of the bench?
Yes,
Somebody's paying for that bench and then they put it in the school, right?
right.
The bench is estimated at $1,500, and there's, 34 of them around the district,
34, right.
and the sponsor is paying for it.
Right.
So there's no school funds?
No.
whatsoever?
None. None. That's why I think the principals were not really looking at it because it wasn't costing them anything. The individual who was doing the program had been working with a mental health group that we have a contract with, and that person is also a part-time employee. So I believe that the principals looked at it, they're familiar with the person. They assumed that this was a vetted program and didn't question it.
Of the 34, one more question. Of the 34 sponsors, just so I know what we're talking about, are there any commercial vendors advertising on these benches?
I believe there wasn't there?
I believe so, I can't remember which one, but it's just like City of Wellington, Christina Lambert, I think was one.
Well, that's the
I
one we
believe like
saw.
a real estate, I believe there might have been a real estate at one of them. A real estate company had sponsored it. I may be confusing it from another sign.
Is that really what we want?
Well,
Commercial advertising in our school?
they do have programs where they can do like a banner. And they usually put them outside where a local company is donating money to the school and they have a banner like, Ace Hardware or whatever. And these, as you could see, have like a little notation as to who donated the money for that.
And Mr. Dixon, if I could help, we have a business partnership program where certain commercial entities will partner with specific schools. If properly recorded, all of that goes through a process where the district is made aware of who those business partners are, and none of that was happening in this case. So to answer your question, those are things that we want to be looking out for, so as to avoid an elementary school becoming a sounding board platform.
Billboard.
There you go.
Billboard.
Alltel Elementary. That's not what we're looking for.
All right, sounds like you're moving forward with regulations and stuff like that.
Another thing that I think you'd be worried about, it kind of looks like the company, the employee that's running the company that's putting this all, it's not even a nonprofit, it's a for-profit business. So that individual or the company can be profiting, making it seem like they're part of the school district and they're profiting off of it, kind of misrepresenting themselves.
Yes, and that's why we have referred this to the general counsel's office as well, because the individual does make a profit from each sale of that.
Okay, further comments?
Who's installing the benches? The company or school board staff?
The company.
Okay, thank you.
Any further comments? Okay, let's move on then to item 7, the RSM presentation of the single audit final report and the management letter.
All right, good morning, Mr. Chair, members. Again, Brett Friedman on behalf of RSM, thanks for having us this morning. Just want to give you a frame of reference. Again, we were here back in the fall. We issued, or the school district issued their annual ACFR on time like they normally do in November. However, at that time, due to all the new CARES Act funding, particularly the ESSER funding, there was guidance coming out from federal that there was going to be additional compliance supplements being issued, and those supplements guide what programs, like within those programs, what they want you to look at and test from a compliance perspective. So since the guidance on what to test was still being developed, because obviously all the CARES and everything was new, we had to put a hold on completing the single audit. So the financial audit was completed back on November 23rd. That report was issued, and we reported the results to you. Just coming back now to go over the results of the compliance audit, which is the uniform guidance in accordance with Federal Single Audit Act. So in your package, we have the summary communications. Again, we kind of walked through those before. Just the one things I'll highlight here again is that we had no disagreements with management, no consultations with other accountants, no significant issues. They were very responsive. Again, we would have been done with this months ago if the federal compliance guidance was there. So we just had to wait for that. The school district received over $300 million in federal awards, significant increase again due to that CARES funding that came in, a lot of the ESSER money. So if you go to the back of your package, I think the best way, towards the back of Section 7, you will see the single audit report. And if you jump towards the back of that report on page 8, there's a summary of auditors' results. So if you can go all the way to the back and keep going all the way down, yeah. So you can go from the end and go up probably about 5 or 6 pages, so about 37, 38, a couple pages up. Yeah. Just jump you right to the key part. Yep. Yeah, a little more. Keep going. So, right there at the top of that page. Okay, so this page here is the summary of auditors' results. And just again to reframe things with regard to the ACFR, which is the new acronym for the annual financial report, there was an unmodified opinion. The school district had no internal control findings, no material weaknesses or significant deficiencies were reported, no material noncompliance. On the federal awards, which again is what was delayed and issued February 22nd, also no material weaknesses or significant deficiencies. One thing that did occur this year is due to the increase to $300 million, there was a lot more that had to be tested. You have a total here of 6 programs, and you can see there's several of the COVID programs in there. There's the Education Stabilization, which is the ESSER funding, and also the Coronavirus Relief Fund. So a lot more work had to go in this year due to all those programs, which involves both accounting and the departments running the programs. But again, we're reporting to you that there were no findings, no noncompliance, no internal controls. The school district qualified as a low-risk auditee. Again, that's based on past performance and compliance. And the threshold for the school board for programs that get evaluated was $3 million. And the only other thing to point out in here, and this is a continuing item, but the school district, there's a summary schedule of prior findings. If you can continue up a little, Joyce. It's page 10. Okay, here there's one finding from 2020, which again, this is kind of a continuing thing. There is some disagreement out there as far as the requirement to report the charter schools. We are comfortable with the school district's position. It's consistent with all the other major school districts, Miami-Dade, Orange County, et cetera. We do report on this because, again, this was issued by the State Auditor General in their report. And again, the district's position has not changed. They still feel they're fully compliant. Outside of that, though, there's no significant findings, no management-led comments. So we'll open up if there are any questions with regard to this.
Okay, thank you. Questions?
I just have one question about that. For my own understanding, please. This is a state-mandated standard that you're saying the school board is taking exception to? Is that right?
Yeah, well, I mean, it is a, GASB pronouncement, GASB
it's
statements
GASB.
14 and 61 that dictate what gets reported. Now, the issue comes in that obviously this district, like other major ones, has evaluated 14 and 61 and determined the charter schools, given their relationship, do not meet the definition for reporting. That's where the disagreement with the state is. But again, we believe the district's reasoning is sound and have no issues with it.
That's fine, thank you. Let me ask you another question. How about other states? Are they taking the same position? Like big states, like Texas or California?
Offhand, that I couldn't tell you.
I'd like to know.
I know, like state of Florida, again, it's unique and.
Yeah, I know that.
Yeah,
I know. I just want to know what we're talking about, that's all.
I would just mention, though, also with charter schools, the way that charter schools are, work within the school district is different within each state. So you can't really compare it because the relationship is different.
Okay.
Whether, for example, we oversee the charter schools in our district financially, but we have no controls over those schools other than just making sure they comply with state statute. In other states, it could be a completely different relationship where they are the ones dictating what the charter schools do.
you. Good
So you
answer.
can't necessarily compare state to state.
Thank you.
Okay, further comments? Hearing none, I'll accept a motion to approve the report.
I'll make a motion to approve the report.
Or a second?
Second. Leandre seconds.
Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Passed unanimously. Okay, we'll move on then to item number 8. This is being brought back up at the suggestion at our last meeting that there be a little further discussion on the background screening procedures for employees, vendors, and school volunteers. So Terry, I'll let you head it off and introduce the people that are going to address this subject.
Sure. I believe we have Chief McCutcheon and Ms. Powell who are here to discuss on the school police, and we have representatives from IT, HR as well sitting at the table, and also operations. So if there's any questions during the presentation, they're here as well.
Before we begin, I'm Jay Bogus, Chief of Staff for the school district. Good morning to living legend, Chairman Dave Talley, and esteemed members of the Audit Committee. I came in as Chief of Staff in August, and this was one of the first projects that I would say came under my leadership for the superintendent, and moving multiple departments in one cohesive, collaborative, synergistic way back to this Audit Committee. And what you're going to hear today was a culmination of work, systems in place, and really the tightening of what those processes were brought to you in September, and now bringing it back to say, hey, these are the assurances made, and making sure that you all know are and very comfortable with what we're putting forward and what we've been doing in that place. We've got a team lead and if you don't mind, Ms. Michael, I'd like to really represent all those team members, everyone from Mark Mitchell, Director of HR, Chief of IT, Deepak Agarwal, Don Pumphrey, Raymond Usler, Michael Callahan, our Deputy Superintendent, and our regionals as part of this process. Chief of Police and even IG being part of it, Carrie High, Ms. Lee, and Randy Law. Reason I say all of that is because as part of this process, that's a collaborative team of a systems approach to how we're tackling the background checks and anything in between. So with that, I tee it up to our Director of School Administration, Ms. Lynn Powell, who will lead us through the audit matrix. Ms. Lynn?
Good morning, everyone. We're going to be going on the matrix that is attached to the agenda. The first point in the audit report was the employee criminal background screening process, that it needed improvement. The updates since the last time we were here and follow through on some of the questions and recommendations from the prior meeting in September. HR, school police, and ERP are working collaboratively on a deep dive into the entire hiring and fingerprinting process. We're hoping for a June 2022 time completion on the revamping and reorganization and restructuring of some of the processes within these departments. The badges for new hires are not printed now until HR notifies school police that the hiring process is absolutely complete. Excuse me, every night at 7 o'clock, school police receive a report from HR for people who completed the hiring process that day. So the next business day, we print the badges, and then they are picked up by HR, usually in the afternoon, for HR to do the distributions. And that's been ongoing. We started that process on September 24th of 2021, and that's been ongoing very successfully since its inception. We've been working on outsourcing fingerprinting, except for school police employees. By FDLE regulations, police department employees cannot have their fingerprints outsourced. But we are, matter of fact, the board on Wednesday evening approved the contract with Fieldprint, who is now going to be our vendor for fingerprinting and photographing. And also they will be doing the issuance of some ID non-access badges. And those badges would be for personnel such as vendors and charter employees who do not need to have an access ID to be able to scan their way, in and out of doors and through buildings. So there's actually, it's two different types of badges. So they would be able to process the non-access badges. And they would be handled with delivery or pickup at the different field print areas. And we're looking to go live. We had a meeting yesterday. We're having weekly meetings, 2 different weekly meetings on the outsourcing and also the deep dive. And we're looking to go live early May with the outsourcing of fingerprinting. Field print will have 5 different areas in the county to begin with, where prospective employees can go to be fingerprinted and have their photographs taken. Once we get started, we're hoping that they will see the increased number and we'll be able to increase additional sites around the county. The next area was 5-year criminal background rescreening of employees wasn't always completed. School Police runs a report the last week of each month with the list of employees whose 5-year fingerprinting anniversary date is coming up the next month, and we resubmit those names to FDLE for an updated background. We started this new process in August of 2021, and we've been working it every month since then, and it's working very well. The resubmission, one of the recommendations or the findings was that school police employees had not been 5-year resubmitted. That was because there's a difference of opinion between FDLE and DOE that had not been done in the past, but we are going to be resubmitting the prints of everyone in the school police department. It has not been done yet because of the high volume of new hires, and processing of potential new hires, and also lack of staff. The fingerprint department has been running at about a 50% capacity of staff for almost a year now. So there have been some changes recently made with HR in the district that we hope will solve that problem coming up very shortly. But we hope to have all the police department resubmissions done by the end of April. The next area was that Falcon records were not up to date, and Falcon is the FDLE controlled reporting system. When someone is fingerprinted and the prints are submitted to FDLE, they are housed in the reports, the background reports that come into the school police is housed in what's called the Falcon database. And this is something that is owned and operated, and it's proprietary to FDLE. But there was a finding that there were 221 employee records that were missing, and 3,579 former employee records were retained in the system unnecessarily. In regards to the 35,079 records purge, it's still in process. It's a manual process. It's extremely tedious. There's multiple screens that we have to be sure that are consulted, because in the Falcon database, if we remove somebody's fingerprints from the Falcon database, saying, telling them they're no longer an employee of the district or somebody with whom the district has business, and we remove them from Falcon and it was done erroneously, the only way to correct that is to have that person come back in and be re-fingerprinted. So we have to check PeopleSoft and some other systems within the fingerprinting services to be sure that that person is truly been terminated from the district, not somebody who may have been terminated as a non-instructional, but now is going to an instructional position because they're changing jobs. So we have to, that's a very tedious process, and because it's in the Falcon database and it's proprietary, it's not something we can do electronically or use technology to do, so it has to be done manually. We are removing records of separated employees. We're working on doing this on a weekly basis. We're also working with HR with some reports that we're trying to get programmed to run that will give us a more accurate, and hopefully will speed it up a little bit. In regards to the 221 missing employee records, that was said that these were employees who were in PeopleSoft, but they were not found in Falcon. We've done a really deep look into that since the last meeting, and we found that some of the Social Security numbers were incorrect, and that was how it was checked, was they took the Social Security numbers out of PeopleSoft, and then they entered the Social Security numbers in Falcon, and to see if there were the same Social Security numbers popped up. And we have found that the people were in there, it's just that the Social Security numbers were incorrect. Somehow in the transition from PeopleSoft to it being run in Falcon, there was an error made, and that many of those employees were actually in the system. And we also found that if you ran the employees by the name, then they would have come up in the system. But they ran them by social security number because we do have many employees in the district with similar names. So that's another time-consuming way to check it by name. But the social security numbers would have been the quickest, but it was not necessarily the most accurate. The next item was the controls for the symmetry security system needed improvement. The symmetry system with fingerprinting, it was found that there were over 50,000 names in the district. The symmetry security is it's a platform that controls the access that people have. So if somebody is terminated from the district, we would have to go in on the school police, IT, and security side and remove them from the symmetry system so that they would no longer have access. Their access badges would not be able to scan them in and out of doors or get them on campuses. We found initially when we started looking at this like 2 years ago, we found that there was a lack of communication to school police to let us know when people separated from the district, so we would not know to take them out of symmetry. And we were looking at how we could correct that. The vendor for this platform had told us that we could update, and we had to go through manually over 50,000 names to see, because you could have, 2 John James Smith working for the district. So you can't just say, oh, we have multiple badges for John James Smith. We had to go and look by date of birth and then even social security numbers with some people. So in doing so, we went through the 50,000 plus names. We updated the database. They had told us that it could then be exported directly into the platform. And after we did that, it would not work. And then the vendor came back and said, oh, no, we're sorry, we made a mistake. It cannot be exported. So now we are going back again and manually doing the 50,000 plus names directly into the platform, which they had told us the first time we couldn't do. We needed to do it the way they had told us. So we are down now to approximately 1,500 names left of the 50,000 names. Once we get this cleaned up in the symmetry system, what will happen is symmetry, through the Active Directory, they will be able to talk system to system. And when somebody is terminated in PeopleSoft, then their badge access will automatically be terminated in the symmetry system. So it will be very seamless once we get this technology up to date. The last part was there was a recommendation for a policy. The policy is in the draft stage, but as we're working through the deep dive into redoing some of our processes between HR, ERP, and school police, we're working on the policy. So we need to finish our deep dive in the reorganization and the reprocessing before we can actually go forward with putting a policy through the process. The last area was inconsistent procedures for verifying background screening information of vendors and volunteers at schools. The deputy superintendent is now receiving a monthly report detailing the background screening information of visitors and volunteers at schools, and it's going to be analyzed by principals, supervisors for follow-up with schools. This is a report that we get from the vendor, and it will tell you how many times Raptor has been used at a school. So if the school has 0 uses, that might be correct, or it might be that they've had visitors or vendors on campus that were not properly screened through the Raptor process. But that is something that it's a new process that has been implemented, and it will be ongoing indefinitely to try and track and just double check and make the schools accountable for using the Raptor system as it's supposed to be used. And that's all I have to report.
Okay, thank you very much. Questions, comments?
Is Symmetry a separate system? That's a separate system that's owned by, I guess, a private company?
Yes. It's a vendor it's a software that we have from a vendor, yes.
So this export, they didn't have the technology to do it, or there's a legal reason they can't do it?
I think it was technology. They had told us there would be no problem with it exporting, so we had personnel manually go in and go through the 50,000 plus names. But then when it came time for school police IT to export it, and it was not working when we got a little bit more down in the weeds with higher ups in the vendors corporation and some more knowledgeable technical people from the vendor, it was found out that what they had told us, what the account manager or consultant had told us, was not actually able to happen technologically.
See, that just doesn't make sense to me, that they, just data from their system, they can't export it.
Well, it's not exporting, it was exporting from their system into another system, because we're developing a single pane of glass with our platforms to be sure that all the systems are talking and we can see everything real time, one place, not having to go into 3 or 4 different programs to look at things or check different databases. So that was the issue, was what they had told us would happen from, that we could update it and then export it into this, what's called the AMAG system. It would not work.
Right. Pardon me.
Yeah.
You finished? I'm sorry.
Yeah. Oh.
As I recall, this was back in September we talked about this? Right, okay.
Yes, we were working on this.
What happened caused all this discussion, just so you know, you weren't here, and it's probably in the minutes, but I don't know. We were advised that certain grades were being changed by people that weren't authorized to change grades, records subsequent to the people leaving. Now, I don't think that's under your preview right here, right?
Grades as in student grades?
Yeah.
No, sir, that would be nothing under school police.
Okay. So how does this relate to that, what we talked about back in September? Because that's what started all this. Because then we found out people had left, but they still could change grades. And I guess that's where we'll bring the security into it. That's why we're talking to the department here, right? I'm confused.
This is the background screening, the audit where we had found that employees had started working prior to being screened.
Yeah.
And that we also had individuals who were still on the system and still being maintained to the tune of something like over $200,000 a year that the district had to pay to maintain their fingerprints on file after they left.
Okay.
And then we found issues involving, there were people that were coming up with new arrests or had left.
Okay. All right, well, that's a little bit more than what I recall. We had, what we saw was, and I think if you check back in the minutes, we saw we had like 4 or 5 different systems working. Nobody was talking to each other. And what we said, what we'd like to see the school district do is try to bring them all together. And is that what we're talking about now?
We have been working for like the last 3 years on bringing some systems to talk together, but one of the systems that we cannot talk to is going to be the Falcon database, because that's proprietarily owned by FDLE. And that is a database that we must access in order to have fingerprints and backgrounds done and to keep an update on the backgrounds. As far as the grades, I've been on this since the initial report came out, and even when Ms. Lee was doing her initial investigation, I had never heard anything about grades until this morning.
It's in the minutes if you want to check it back. I mean, I know we talked about this.
Yeah, there's two different audits. One had to do with grades that were changed after staff had left, and that's a separate audit. But
It's still the same problem.
Yes, I'm just clarifying.
Yeah, okay, got it. Different audit, same problem. That's all, okay.
Mark?
The one thing I go back to the symmetry, what it sounds like is that the company, if it's called Symmetry, didn't want to incur the cost to convert their data into a form that can be imported into the school board system. And so it should have, maybe it should have been negotiated with them, maybe that for them to either do it because if they want to keep the contract, or maybe the IT can tell us has anyone looked into if the school board itself if they could just give you the data that can't be imported, but the school board itself could convert that data to be imported.
Yeah, if we can have somebody from IT come on up, and we have a seat here where you can have a microphone.
So that way it would save all that manual process.
And I don't know that it was the symmetry vendor. It was one of the vendors because there are multiple systems that we were trying to integrate. So it may not have been the symmetry vendor that said it could be. It could have been AMAG that said you could do it in symmetry and you can export it to AMAG, but then AMAG said, no, that doesn't work. I'm not really sure which vendor because there's multiple vendors with whom we are working.
Hi, good morning. I'm Mike Callahan, Director of the IT PMO. I also serve as the primary liaison between the IT division and school police and transportation. So speaking specifically about the AMAG Symmetry program, the IT division per se has no access to that system. It's a law enforcement system. School police has their own IT resources that report up their chain. We work collaboratively with them and transportation IT resources as needed and as called for. So in this, like I said, in this particular system, we're pretty much out of the loop on AMAG Symmetry because we know access to the system, no insight into the system.
Okay, it just confused me that it just seems to me that this could happen, but somewhere, no one wants to incur the cost of making that happen. So it'll be done manually. That's what it sounds like to me. I'm not quite sure if that's right or wrong.
Mr. Chair, at the end of the day, our goal is to get that child from home back home safely, not to have a systematic conversation. And if my voice is trembling, it's because I'm not just nervous, we're in the same place. Systems not communicating because of whatever. And I'm not sure if we're really, I don't know, not that smart. I'm not sure if we're really taking, again, keep saying I don't know, but are we taking the necessary steps to ensure that that child from the front door back to the front door is safe? And I'm not sure, I shouldn't use that word because I know we are. But are we doing all the necessary things to ensure that it's happening? Because I'm hearing where the employee criminal background screening, vendor access is going to be outsourced. I mean, you can get a vendor badge, but there are some vendor badges that still get access to schools. However, this is going to be done differently and outsourced. So we've created another layer of an outsourced component, and I'm not sure it's going to still communicate. Then we have, and I respect FDLE and the Falcon system, but there's still a communication blockage with our internal systems outside of the Falcon system. We're spending countless personnel time doing manual work, which is, I see the success there, but what did that look like with personnel time to reduce from this manual, tedious process, and how much labor went into that in order to get that accomplished in the time period? So I'm just not sure where we're going. I have a vision, I have an idea, but are we moving in the direction to really ensure that our systems are talking? Because if the school has an IT and school police has an IT, somewhere in there for our students' safety, our students to feel secure and assure their security here with every adult that's present and that will encounter them, there should be something. And I am excited to hear there should be something in place to ensure that's happening. And I'm excited to hear about the deputy superintendent is going to receive a monthly report. I must ask, is that a policy, or is it an internal memo with this administration in place, or is that a school policy that the deputy superintendent is going to receive a monthly report?
Procedure or protocol.
Is this a policy? No? Procedure protocol? I
Okay,
don't-
further comments?
There's a difference between, the policy has to go through the whole rulemaking process, and that's different than, I believe, it's not part of the school board district policy, but it's a internal procedure.
All right.
And if I may, just to address the concerns about the background, with the outsourcing of fingerprinting, they will only be fingerprinting and photographing. The individuals will be fingerprinted under the district's ORIs, which are the numbers that control, tell FDLE whether they're instructional or non-instructional, whether they're a police department. There are different ORIs issued to various agencies for different reasons. But that ORI, all the ORI information is overseen by the school police, fingerprinting. When someone is fingerprinted by field print at one of their locations, the prints will go to FDLE for them to do the background check. The results of that background check will still then come to school police, just like it does now when we print them here on site. And we will then review those background results just like we do now. And the results will be uploaded into PeopleSoft or turned over to HR if there's something in the background that shows some concern for them to investigate further. So that process is not changing, so it's just the actual physical taking of the fingerprints and the taking of the photograph. And the printing of the non-access ID badges was something that they offered, and we thought it was a great idea to try and be more customer service friendly, to give people, because we are such a large county, so that everybody doesn't have to come right here to the DAC in order to get their fingerprint card, their badge cards. So, and field print has been utilized by Broward County School System for the past 15 years. So they do have a record, a pretty long track record with working with a school district and doing this process.
Thanks.
Frank, did you have a comment?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chair. Maybe it's covered under employee criminal background screening processes need improvement, but it was recently brought to my attention that, and I'm sure the board doesn't want to do anything to impede the ability of principals to bring in needed resources for the students as soon as they're needed, but apparently HR responded that they don't know, they have no control over who the principals are hiring. So we had employees that were actually in the schools before they were ever, before there was ever any background check. I just want to know if that's part of this investigation or part of this process, so that that procedure is immediately controlled. Because HR's response was, we don't know what the principals are doing. We don't deal with those employees that the principals are bringing in. So where are we on that?
Mark?
HR has been working with Mr. Tierney and the regionals and instructional superintendents to stand up a multifaceted system, basically. So it started with communication of expectations. That's been done, to my knowledge, at least 5 times, since this audit came up. So started with communication of expectations, then monitoring, right? So we stood up a monthly monitoring system, likewise, to check on that. We can actually check what schools are doing. And then follow up with schools. So we do the monthly monitoring and the follow-up with schools. The regionals and instructionals have been involved in that, and I'm happy to report trending down on that. And for the last 2 months, we've trended at 0. Knock on some wood, right? So the communication of expectations, the monitoring, and the follow-up has been working thus far, and we've got to be vigilant with that. Obviously, that's what ensures the security at our schools.
To follow up, we spoke to principals. I did verbally and in writing, spoke to the instructional regionals verbally and in writing. I'm going to get a monthly report on that per internal protocol, because we could do that right away, vice the policy procedure. And we're monitoring that, working closely, and pleased to see zeros and we'll expect to continue to see zeros.
All right, thank you.
Right. Other comments? Questions? If not, I'll entertain a motion to accept this report.
Motion to accept?
Have a second?
Weigel, second.
Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
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 All opposed? Passed unanimously. Lynn, thank you for that report.
You're
Very
welcome,
well
sir.
done. I just have one question pertaining to that, and that is, I would like to see somehow that we get a follow-up of the completion dates that you have listed for these different factors, and I'm not sure how to go about that, but I'd just like to keep up with it to make sure that the target dates, basically, that you have implemented come to pass.
Would the
Mr.
board like a
Chair, I
follow-up
will-
in 6 months?
I will offer the motion to have that follow-up in the specified time period. August?
August?
August, that's the
Okay.
date on here, yes.
All right, we'll schedule for August.
Is there a second to that motion?
I'll second. I have
Discussion?
one more question. I would like for someone to bring back the discussion that we had so I can refresh my memory about how we started to talk about all these different systems and grade changes. I would like that to come back for discussion next meeting.
Yeah, would you, we can discuss that SIS audit if you'd like.
Well, I don't know what the name of it is, whatever it is.
Where
SIS.
is Randy? Would you come on up?
Oh, it's an intern, okay.
Yes, that's what. Yes, that was related to the SIS student grade changes audit reports. That was
Yeah.
also presented in September. So we can make arrangement with IT and the academic side to come back to
That's great.
provide an update on that.
That's great, thank you. Thank you very much.
Any further discussion? We have a motion and a second. All in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Aye?
Opposed? Passed unanimously. Okay, the next item is an investigative report that was previously sent to each of you committee members by Joyce. We'll move on. Any general comments? If not, Jay, I want to thank you in particular for coming, and Major McCutcheon. Well, at any rate, thank you for being here. And if there's no further business, our next meeting is scheduled to be April 15th, which is a Friday. And on that note, I'll accept a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Second it. Second.
Motion to approve, adjourn, meeting adjourned. Thank you.